My love of chocolate started early. Some of my earliest memories from childhood were around chocolate. I remember sneaking into the cupboard and grabbing a handful of semi-sweet chocolate morsels and rummaging through the cupboard to find where my mother had hidden her stash of chocolate bars. Since then, I think it's safe to say that I've eaten chocolate every single day. I can't imagine a world without chocolate, but it's exactly the future that we're facing. Through college studying psychology, my first sales job, and a marketing career at Microsoft, I relied on my daily fix of chocolate. I had no idea at the time that it was going to be such a central theme in my life. Over 20 years ago, I invested in a small regional chocolate company called Seattle Chocolate because I loved the product. And in 2001, an earthquake shook the Seattle area. It was called the Nisqually earthquake. And there were exactly 2 buildings damaged during that earthquake. The building Seattle Chocolate was renting without earthquake insurance, and directly across the street, Starbucks headquarters, but only a small section of which Seattle Chocolate was renting space in. Our building was condemned when the walls rattled away from the ceiling. Somebody was going to have to step up to move the operation, or the company was going to go out of business. So I did, and at that point, I became the owner. The following year, when my youngest went off to kindergarten, I decided to step in and help the still struggling company with its marketing, part-time. Within 6 weeks of joining the company, the CEO quit and left me holding the bag and wondering if I should have kept some of my opinions to myself. And I had no idea what I was going to do. Should I let the company go out of business? I felt there were 30 families already relying on this company for their livelihood. And I thought to myself, it's chocolate, how hard can it be? Ha ha. So I decided to step in and take over the day-to-day operation. And thus began my transformation to business person, entrepreneur, and CEO. Of course, I had no plan to turn this company around, so I just took one day and one problem at a time. I went with gut instinct. I picked my employees' brains. I went and visited the chocolate aisle in the grocery store. I read business books, and I read every article I could find on chocolate, and things slowly started to improve. I had a huge, steep learning curve. I had to learn about manufacturing, warehousing, the distribution channel, finance, how to build a brand, and how to develop a corporate culture. And that was the fun part. And of course, I had to really love it to endure the lows while raising 2 kids. I had an ulcer, a panic attack, a trip to the ER, and it took me nearly 10 years to turn that company around. But I'm still here, 17 years later, and things are better. I'd like to unpack chocolate with you today. But first, I have a question for you. How much money would you be willing to spend on a bottle of wine that you share with a friend? $15? Pretty sure, yeah. Now, how much money would you be willing to spend on an artisan bar of chocolate that you share with that same friend? $3? $5? Maybe not 15? Well, I'm hoping by the end of our time here together that you'll consider spending as much money on an artisan bar of chocolate as you would on that bottle of wine, because I'm afraid if you don't, we may not have chocolate in the future. In ancient times, 4 millennia ago, the Mayans understood the value of chocolate. Of course, it wasn't chocolate back then, it was just the cacao bean, which they used as their currency. I mean, it's money. And the elite in their society took the bean and turned it into a drink that they believed to be an aphrodisiac and a strength-enhancing beverage that they would consume before heading into battle. Somehow, the ancients understood that chocolate was special. Today, chocolate is the inexpensive darling of the candy aisle. But I believe that we're in the throes of a chocolate renaissance, where people are starting to understand that chocolate is complex and sophisticated and even nutritious. Chocolate comes from the Theobroma cacao tree, a plant indigenous to Central and South American rainforests. These trees pop up along the side of the road there, or they're planted in groves on farms. They are typically very small farms, 3 to 5 acres each, family-owned and passed down from generation to generation. And there's over 5 million of those farms in the world. but every single one of them is within 20 degrees of the equator, because that's where the rainforests are. In the early colonial days, the Europeans figured out how to turn that bean into chocolate. So they took the plants from the Americas and brought them to their colonies in Africa. Today, 70% of the world's cacao comes from two West African nations of Ivory Coast and Ghana. And 75% of the people in the Ivory Coast rely on chocolate or cacao for their livelihood. And with today's chocolate prices, we ensure that they will remain poor forever. And every country, almost every country in that belt along the equator, does not have political power or economic advantage. The Theobroma cacao tree is a strange-looking tree with football-shaped pods that grow directly out of the trunk. The farmers use long-handled machetes to cut those pods down, and then right there in the farm, they cut the pods open, which reveals a sticky, white, very acidic, and quite delicious pulp that contains the beans. As soon as they open the pod, a fermentation process starts, and they load the sticky beans into fermentation boxes, where it ferments for almost a week while they stir it and expose it to air. How many of you knew that chocolate was a fermented product? From there, they load the beans onto a long drying bed where it dries and basks in the sun for another week. Finally, the beans are ready to go to market. But of course, these farms are really remote. They're in the middle of the jungle. There's often not a road, or if there is one, it's in really bad shape. And it wouldn't matter anyway, because most of these farmers can't afford a vehicle, so there's no cars or trucks. So what they do is they load these beans in burlap sacks and put them on wheelbarrows, where they push the wheelbarrow for hours through a muddy, ruddy road of whatever it is, till they can finally get paid. Each pod contains 20 to 40 almond-shaped beans, and it takes an entire pod to make one chocolate bar. And a tree only has 20 or 30 of those pods per year, which is roughly 3 pounds of chocolate a year. Now compare that to the way that we consume chocolate on the other side of the world. Americans consume 9.5 pounds of chocolate per person per year. That's 327 million of us. And we don't even come close to first place in this category. The Swiss do, with nearly 20 pounds of chocolate per person per year. God love them. As the population of our chocolate-loving world continues to explode, this demand is going to quickly outpace the number of farmers who are willing to work for next to nothing. In its natural state, the cacao bean has a strong, bitter flavor. Without sugar, it's a bit of an acquired taste, but is darn near the perfect food. It has a heart-healthy fat, a stimulant similar to caffeine called theobromine. It has protein, magnesium, fiber, and is the food that is the highest in antioxidants by a long shot, by 50% to the next closest one, pecans. So next time you want to add some antioxidants to your diet, reach for a 1-ounce dark chocolate bar. Or you can continue to munch on 2 1/3 cup of kale. If you source beans from different plants and different regions of the world and process everything else exactly the same, they're going to taste wildly different. So no surprise, the next part of the process, the chocolate making process, is equally difficult. So the makers, who are largely in the developed world, take the beans and sort them, and then they roast them, and then they remove the shells to reveal the nib, and then they take the nib and they press it into a paste that's called liquor, and then they take that liquor and further refine it so it's not gritty. Nobody wants gritty chocolate. And then they slowly cook it for maybe days to get off the really harsh, volatile, strong flavors. That's when they add the sugar and the milk or whatever other ingredients. It's really hard to make chocolate, but it's even harder to make good chocolate. And that, I believe, is 2/3 science and 1/3 art, finesse, and patience. I have a chocolate tasting wheel that helps you kind of identify, because once they've made a delicious chocolate, it's an unusual flavor profile. It's layered, and you put it in your mouth, and it's kind of hard to describe the experience. Now, I've seen a similar wheel in wine, when you're doing wine tastings, different adjectives. But the point is that both products are equally complex and equally interesting and fun to taste. Cacao has, like all crops, many natural and man-made enemies. There's disease and drought, made worse by climate change. There's political strife and corruption in a lot of these countries. And there's desperation and poverty. Sometimes the farmers will cut down the rainforest to plant additional cacao trees in the hopes of earning a few more dollars. Of course, the cacao tree is a rainforest. It wants to be in that canopy. And of course, we all know that's not good for our planet, but they need whatever dollars they can eke out. The farmers are not making enough money to have a decent living. And their children see that. They see how hard they're working, and they're thinking, I don't want to do that when I grow up. So there's a real crisis at origin. The average farmer age right now is in the 50s. And they're not sure who's going to take over the farming of their land in the next generation. And guess what? We don't have farmers, we don't have the crop, we don't have chocolate. Today's situation is bleak and complicated. The farmers are far away and they have no voice. And guess what? They don't have a backup plan where they can supplement their income by working in a retail store. They're in the middle of the jungle. So they continue to do what they've done for generations and just hope that things will change. Sometimes the farmers are forced to use children, child labor, to farm during the harvest because they can't afford to pay anybody. And when the harvest is done, they don't want these beans to rot. They need every bean. And we don't like that in the industry any more than you do. But it's a very complicated problem to solve because these farms, over 5 million of them, are all over the countryside. There isn't a centralized way to communicate with them or to get the message across. So the situation continues. There are certifying agencies like Fair Trade, Rainforest Alliance certification that are on the ground a little more often, trying to teach the farmers best practices and encourage them by paying them a little bit more to send their children to school. It's helpful, but it's not really enough for wholesale change. I know people who are boycotting chocolate right now because of this. And I think, well, you're not helping the situation because all you're doing is depriving the farmers of their livelihood altogether. And at the end of the day, I believe it's the low prices on chocolate and this artificially low ceiling and low perceived value of chocolate. We think of it as a candy at Halloween and Easter that kids should eat, and it's cheap, right? But it's not. It can be an amazing delicacy. But the chocolate makers are pinched by this situation because if you can't charge enough for the chocolate, then you can't afford to pay more for the chocolate. And here we stay in this catch-22. I believe if you pay the farmers more, pay the chocolate makers more, then the children will go to school. I envision a world where there's a chocolate course at dinner, maybe even a special plate. And I see you sitting around and analyzing and tasting and appreciating the terroir or the percent cacao or the flavor notes, the subtle flavors, and knowing how far away the product really grew. I think you're going to know someday that cacao from Venezuela tastes of red fruit and spice. And cacao from Papua New Guinea tastes earthy and citrusy. And you're going to want to pay more so that the farmer and the maker and everyone along the food chain takes the necessary time to deliver the flavor note in that bean and that delicacy to our table. As an industry, what are we doing? Well, I opened my factory at Seattle Chocolate to tours because I want to bring people in and educate them because I believe that's the first step, understanding the stuff that we're learning today. There's a Fine Chocolate Industry Association that gets together several times a year to brainstorm solutions to our troubled supply chain. There's an Heirloom Cacao Foundation that discovers new varietals of cacao every year in faraway jungles and tries to preserve them for our future. There's universities all over the world that are studying the genetics of cacao, maybe labeling them someday like Merlot or Cabernet. We don't have that in the world of chocolate, but we have just as many interesting varietals. We need that. So there's a movement happening all around us, and that's a good thing. But there's one very critical thing missing, and that's you. Well, help join and accelerate the Renaissance. Buy a $10 artisan chocolate bar. Share it with a friend. Analyze it. Find out what the farmer's doing, where are they located, what do you like about it. Then buy another different one and compare and contrast them, because no two 72% chocolate bars taste the same. They were fermented differently. They came from different varietals. They were roasted differently. And it really results in a different product every time. It's fascinating. And guess what? It's fun. Bring a $40 box of chocolate to your next dinner party, providing dessert and conversation. It's going to take newfound and widespread respect, understanding, and appreciation of chocolate to elevate cacao and give its farmers the sustainable and prosperous future that they deserve. Thank you.